All right, guys, good afternoon. I think most of you are already online. Um, Today, we're going to have our last class on this topic or topics of modern physics. Okay. Um, it's just a brief introduction to basic concepts of quantum physics. There is no assignment on Cengage about these topics, but there is an extra credit assignment that you can submit before the final on Tuesday. Okay. Also, I sent an email and an announcement regarding the time of the final. So I would like to start the final on Tuesday at 12. That means at noon. So we can be done by 2, and then I can easily grade and submit the final grades by the end of the day or by Wednesday. Okay. So if somebody cannot make it, let me know. All right, remember that the exam is in person, so you have to come to class. 2 hours. You can bring your formula sheet. That's fine. I can provide one if you don't have one. And most of the topics, most of the classes have been recorded. You can have pre-recorded videos. This class is being recorded. These topics won't be in tomorrow's exam. Okay, these topics or a couple of questions from this topic will be in the final exam. All right. So make sure you're also checking the sample final that you can find in files. It's basically 2 exams on one because that has 60 questions. The final exam will have 30 questions. Okay. So you can start working on this during the weekend, prepare for the final exam. Okay. So the topics of this chapter or chapters is to introduce the idea of black body radiation and the Planck's hypothesis, the concept of a photon and the photoelectric effect, Compton scattering, and then we'll finish with the de Broglie wavelength and Heisenberg uncertainty principle. Okay. There are some problems, some examples. A few of those are quite simple. As I always say, just be careful with the units. Be careful with some of the wording that is being used. But the equations in general in this chapter are simple. Okay. You will see when we do the problems that we just need to know a couple of parameters to actually solve for a given variable. Okay. Okay. So actually, let me show you the whiteboard. So I've made a summary here of what this is about. So we start with the concept of light. Okay, remember that light is an electromagnetic wave, is radiation. I drew there the waves and the ray that we have used so far. And then you can see these dots. Those are particles. So one of the ideas, one of the key ideas when it comes to the introduction to quantum physics is the discovery of the dual behavior of light. So yesterday, we spoke about how light behaves as a wave. And we explored a couple of phenomena, the interference and the diffraction of light. All of that is explained by understanding how light is actually transfer wave. And we spoke about that when I introduced electromagnetic waves. However, there are a few experiments that we are going to talk about where there were some indications that besides acting as a wave, light was also a stream of particles. Okay, and thanks to that, we were able to quantify the energy of light. You see, up until now, we talk about intensity, power of an electromagnetic wave. We didn't really talk about how we measure the energy of a wave. There is a way to measure that. And when we measure that, we realize that light comes into packets. Light comes in packets, bundles of light. All right? So to know that, to understand that, we have to introduce what's a black body or black body radiation. A black body is an object that absorbs and emits radiation continuously. So in other words, it's a perfect absorber and a perfect emitter. Now, the equation for black body, which is here, looks a bit complicated, right? We have here 2h mu to the power of 3 over c squared times 1 over the E number h mu over kt minus 1. So there are a lot of variables there. And I wrote here, T is the temperature, mu is the frequency. This is the thing though. In analytical physics, when we start going into modern physics, relativity, quantum physics, quantum mechanics, the variable for frequency is not F anymore. We use this letter, that looks like a V. We call it nu in the Greek alpha. And then we have H, which I'm gonna talk in a little bit. C is the speed of light. And then K is the Boltzmann constant. All right. That you may have seen, or you should have seen in the theory of gases. Because the kinetic theory of gases allows you to find the kinetic energy of a gas, which is the net kinetic energy of all the particles in a gas. And that's equal to 3/2 of kT, where K is the Boltzmann constant. So that you should know. That's why H mu is energy. KT is also energy. So the exponent here doesn't have any units. They cancel. All right? Joules. So let's skip this for a bit. We realize that light is actually made of photons. The photon is described in physics as the bundle of light. Is the fundamental particle of the electromagnetic force, aka light. You see, there are 4 fundamental forces in nature. You know, up until this course, you know about 2 of them. The electromagnetic force and the gravitational force that you studied in the previous subject, in the previous physics course. The other 2 are the weak and strong nuclear forces. The strong nuclear force is the one responsible of holding the nucleus of the atom together. And the weak nuclear force is the one responsible of radioactivity decay. Okay? What happens, for example, with uranium? Nuclear reactions, they can emit or absorb particles, alpha particles, beta particles, gamma particles. So those are governed by the strong or the weak nuclear forces. Okay? And those 2 are the strongest in terms of energy. And yeah, in terms of energy, those are the strongest forces of nature. The weakest one is the gravitational force. And that should make sense based on some of the applications that we did in this course. When we were talking about electrons or particles accelerating, well, these are fundamental particles. They are masses. What's the difference between a photon and an electron? That the electron, the proton, the neutron are subatomic particles. They have mass. Very tiny, but they have mass. Energy, momentum, etc., etc. This guy, the photons, do not have mass. They have energy, though. And as we will see, they have momentum. Okay? So, okay, going back to what I was saying, you can have an electron, and the electron has no mass, but it's so tiny that the reason an electron moves is only due to an electric field. So if the electric field is pointing like that, I know some of you may not like this. Some people are doing exam today. The electric field goes like that. Remember, the electric force goes the other way. But anyway, that is the one that is the reason why it moves. Even though there is mass and mg is the force of gravity, it doesn't. So it's a nice way, it's a simple way to visualize that gravity is indeed a very weak force compared to the other forces of nature. Okay? What is the ultraviolet catastrophe? And then we go to the slides. So the ultraviolet catastrophe is the point where the classical prediction for intensity, aka and also power, doesn't align with the experimental visualization. You see, when we observe in astronomy radiation coming from stars, we can plot intensity versus frequency in a graph like this, scatter graph, and we get data points like that. We don't get a situation like that. Where does the classical prediction come from? Well, the classical prediction relies on the concept of power or luminosity. So one equation that we use a lot in astronomy is to find the luminosity of a star. The luminosity of a star is equal to 4 pi r squared sigma temperature to a power of 4. That's the Stefan Boltzmann constant, by the way. 4 pi r squared is the surface area of the star. And T to the 4 is the surface temperature to a power of 4. So power, intensity, should increase with frequency and temperature. The more frequency, the more temperature, the more energy. So we should see a exponential, a very strong increase. But we don't see that. We see that it reaches a peak and then it goes down. Eventually, we realize we can find the frequency or wavelength at the peak by using Wien's law, which is here. All right. So that was one indicator that classical predictions from mechanics do not always agree when we, especially when we study the quantum particles, let's say in here, right? In this case, phenomena like black body radiation. So also you have in the slides, an ideal black body absorbs all the radiation or all the light that is incident upon it. By the way, this is a simple explanation on why wearing black on summer when it's hot outside, right? It's not a good idea because it's absorbing all the light. So it gets very hot, right? Wearing black on winter makes sense because you want to, the little radiation, the little heat that you have, that you are exposed to, you want your coat or your jacket to absorb it. That's why normally winter coats are black, right? And summer clothes are bright or white, right? Because they reflect that radiation. An ideal black body is also an ideal radiator. For example, stars, right? The sun is a good example of that. This is, for example, sort of graphs that we use in astronomy to plot the relative intensity versus frequency of different black bodies, different stars. So you can see how the curve reaches a peak and then it starts coming down. For the sun, for example, the curve will look like this because the surface temperature of the sun is 5,800, about 6,000 kelvins. Oh yeah, that's another thing. Temperature in modern physics, especially in quantum mechanics and relativity, temperature is measured in kelvins, no more Celsius, okay? The scientific unit for temperature is actually kelvins, all right? Now, what is the function that allows us to predict this? Well, the function is this equation that I have here. The black body curve equation is the theoretical equation that you see in there. So Planck's hypothesis was basically this equation. All right? So here, you see how the equation has the nu to a power of 3? So without this factor, without this, if you plot P, relative intensity, as a function of nu, you get a rapid increase, like this. You don't get that once you add this extra factor here. That's key to understand Planck's hypothesis. So is there a way? Yeah, you know already there is a way to find the peak intensity and the frequency at the peak intensity, right? There, Wiens displacement law. Keep in mind, guys, that that equation is rearranged to find the peak frequency. The one I had here on the board is the other reformulation using wavelengths. So let's see if you remember. How do we go from frequency to wavelength? Because there in front of you, you have that the frequency peak, I want to write it here, the frequency at the peak is equal to 5.88 times 10 to the 10, basically hertz, right? So hertz times the temperature in kelvins. So that's what we have here. I wrote it over there. Right? But I cut this before. Well, remember that radiation is an electromagnetic wave. In vacuum, in general, there is a relationship between frequency, wavelength, and the speed of light, which is basically C equals to lambda times frequency. Right? So let's actually call this, as it should, mu. So this equation will be basically C over the frequency. So this is because you divide the speed of light by this. The speed of light by this give you this value here. So you can find the wavelength at the peak or the frequency at the peak using Green's law. Guys, last semester there was a question where the students had to use Green's law to find the frequency. Yeah. Let's see. And the final from last semester here. So to see exactly. Yeah, here it is. So yeah, they gave them the temperature of a star. It can be 10,000 kelvins. And you have to find the wavelength. So just using that equation, that's how you do it. All right. In fact, let's actually do it. Let's one example quickly. 10,000 kelvins is the temperature of a star like, not Deneb, I would say Vega. Yeah. 30,000, 40,000 will be blue giants like Rigel or Bellatrix. But 10,000 seems like a good number. All right, we can do it for the sun as well. In fact, let's do it for the sun. The sun is about 6,000 kelvins. So let's find the wavelength at the peak, right? So if the temperature is 6,000 kelvins, I can find the wavelength at the peak. So the wavelength at the peak is the constant 2.898 times 10 to a negative 3 meters Kelvin divided by the temperature in kelvins, 6,000 Kelvin. So Kelvin's cancels, you get the wavelength in meters. So let's see what we get. So I get 483 times 10 to a negative 9 nanometers. So that, sorry, meters. So that's equal to 483 nanometers. So that's what we do actually to find the wavelength of visible light. So if I look at here, 483 is about between green and blue. Yeah, a lot of students are surprised that the peak wavelength of the sun's radiation is about green, bluish. Remember, the light coming from any star is white, but we see the sun yellow because of the atmosphere. And the same we can say for other stars. Okay? This is just an indicator of where all that radiation peaks. And if I want to find the frequency, I use C equals to lambda times frequency. We did that before to find the frequency at the peak. Simple, right? So that's an application, and that's already one of the first steps of quantum physics, right? Green's law. And here they explain about the ultraviolet catastrophe. And here they show you a graph as the one I show you, where they compare the classical prediction and the experimental observation, fitting very nicely with the Planck's prediction. All right. And as you know from science, we are here to test and verify our predictions. If they are not verifiable, there is something wrong with the model, right? In some cases, we have to totally scratch the model. In some cases, we have to go back to the board and actually double check the math, double check assumptions, double check parameters. Okay, so I already mentioned that light is a stream of photons. So that means that with Planck, it was discovered that light can actually be quantized. The energy of radiation is quantized, and that's what we have the first equation. Well, actually the second equation based on the Planck's model or hypothesis, which is basically the energy of the photon. The energy of the photon is defined as what you see in there. En equals to NHF. What is N? Well, from chemistry, you should know that N is the principal quantum number. But in general, it's just the level, the energy level. Okay? If you're just looking for the energy of a single photon, right? The energy of a single photon is equal to H times frequency. But we can also write this, remembering that C equals to lambda times frequency, then the energy is also Hc divided by lambda, where now finally H is the Planck's constant, 6.63 times 10 to a negative 34 joules second. So very small, right? If I were to use this for a frequency, let's suppose my frequency was 5 terahertz, which is a lot. That's a lot. So then the energy is 6.63 times 10 to a negative 34 multiplied by 5 times 10 to a 14. And if you do the math, you're going to get a very small value. If you do the math here, you will get 33.15 times 10 to a negative 20 joules. That's energy. So a few things, right? That's the energy of just one photon. Light has unmeasurable, it's a way of saying, right? But a very large number of photons. So if you multiply by the very large number of photons, then you can get a more realistic value in joules. However, in quantum physics, we use another unit of energy to actually make it more easy to write values of energy in books and also to actually publish them in papers or in journals. And that has to do with a unit of energy that I introduced in chapter 16. You should remember the electron volt. The electron volt is a unit of energy. It's the amount of energy an electron needs to change by 1 volt. Right, remember? We define U as Q delta V. If Q is the charge of the electron and delta V is 1 volt, you get 1 electron volt. So 1 electron volt in joules, what is it? 1 electron volt is 1.60 times 10 to a negative 19 joules. So I have this amount of energy in joules. How do I go from joules to electron volts? Easy. I divide this number by 1.60 times 10 to a negative 19. So now I can get a more interesting value. I get about 2.07 electron volts. So that's 2.07 electron volts. That is this by using this conversion here. So it all comes back, right? It all eventually is used. And again, look at that value, right? That makes more sense in terms of making it look more simple. Okay, so that's all this. So as I mentioned, Planck's constant is a very tiny number. So that means that the quantization of energy is not it's not obvious at all in macroscopic situation. For example, the light that is being radiated towards me right now in this room is measured in joules, the energy, and the power in watts. I don't have to use electron volts. Why? Because there are many, many, many photons coming towards me from that fluorescent on the ceiling, right? So macroscopically, guys, a lot of these quantum physics / mechanics concepts don't really are irrelevant, which is why normally we describe physics as being not divided, but as having two branches of physics. We have the very large macroscopic branch where we use Newton's laws and for more exotic situations, relativity, right? Relativistic physics. And then we have the quantum part of physics, where we study subatomic particles, fundamental particles, the other three fundamental forces of nature, and of course, the nucleus of the atom and the atom itself. One of the keys to fully understand physics as a whole will be to combine them together. The difficult part of doing that is that the laws of the macroscopic world don't really apply in the microscopic quantum reality. We cannot apply quantum Einsteinian relativistic physics, at least general relativity. We cannot apply that in quantum reality. Why? Because, for example, the foundation of general relativity is the fact that gravity affects space and time. And that's already obvious in the quantum world, right? And the way particles behave in the quantum reality, right, in quantum physics, is different than the way they behave microscopically, right? A simple way of saying this will be that we can perceive 4 dimensions, maybe 5, if we get to fully understand wormholes. But fundamental particles like photons or even subatomic particles like electrons and protons may move in higher dimensions, 4, 5, or 6, according to more current models or theories, maybe 11 dimensions, right? So that's still to be proven, but it marks a huge difference between what we understand microscopically and macroscopically. Anyway, that's there the equation for the energy of a photon. And this is an illustration of what photons are. So what is a consequence of this whole idea of the energy of the photon depending on the frequency or the wave? Well, the first consequence comes to intensity. As you remember, we defined the intensity of light. And it's always this idea that more photons or more energy means more power, means more intensity. Well, there you have it. It's not the case in quantum physics. A beam with low intensity means a beam with a larger wavelength or a lower frequency. A beam with high intensity, as you can see there, may have the same wavelength or frequency, but you may have just more photons. All right? So energy doesn't rely on the amount. Energy does not change with more photons because the wavelength is the same and the frequency is the same. If you change the wavelength or the frequency, then you are changing the energy according to the equation, right? This equation here. So what does it change when I increase the amount of photons? Well, the intensity. The intensity increases. So that means intensity and energy do not correlate anymore. Like in when we do macroscopic studies of energy, power, and intensity, right? Okay, so what was the experiment and the reason Einstein won his Nobel Prize, right? A lot of people think that Einstein won the Nobel Prize due to the publication of a special relativity in 1905 and then general relativity in 1915. That's not the case. He won the Nobel Prize by his strong contribution to everything we have spoken about. Because you see, Planck had a nice theoretical contribution, the equation for the black body radiation, and there were evidences that what he was stipulating was true. But as you know from science, we need to have experimental results, even though sometimes they don't work right in the lab. But generally speaking, after several trials, you start getting a correlation of values. You can make a plot and you can find some correlation and some values that allow you to get some conclusions. That's why I'm always very imperative in writing conclusions, because that's how I know whether or not you understood the experiment and whether or not you believe the experiment was successful or not. Anyway, so what Einstein did, he struck pieces of metal with different frequencies of light, incoming light, as you are seeing there. And then he was able to capture photoelectrons inside a collector that basically looks like a parallel plate capacitor. Now, when you have the motion of photoelectrons or electrons, you start getting a current. That's why he used the ammeter. So it's a very basic diagram, very basic situation. But that very basic experiment allowed him to realize that the incoming light was made of particles. In other words, he proved experimentally that light is also made of fundamental particles that we know as the photons. Why? Because the photons absorb, the electrons, the free electrons on the metals, they absorb photons of the incoming light gaining energy and going into what we know as the excitation stage that you should know from Chem 101. And then they do the jump to the ground level or from other levels, from N1 to N2, from N2 to N3. Well, they have this jump from energy levels, which happens due to the absorption of photons. So the electron is absorbing photons. That was the key of this experiment. And the equation is basically the conservation of energy. Let's take a look. There. The energy of the photoelectrons, the kinetic energy of the photoelectrons, which is that Kmax, is equal to the incoming energy minus the work function. And you're probably thinking, what's the work function? Well, the work function, you think about it, is like the work against the energy. It's like friction, right? So every metal, every piece of metal, gold, silver, aluminum, they will have a threshold energy for electrons to be ejected from the piece of metal. That is what the work energy is, or the work function is. The work function is the threshold energy that you need to strike with to remove electrons from the metal. So that's where we have this equation. The cutoff frequency that you need to remove photoelectrons is given by the work energy function divided by H. Because remember, HF is the energy, right? Frequency here, they use F, but anyway. So classical predictions, any beam of light of any color, just by giving it more intensity, should be able to replicate the experiment. The maximum kinetic energy should increase as intensity increases. But we know already that intensity doesn't correlate with energy. So then the observations contradicted the classical predictions. Light must have a minimum frequency or wavelength to actually eject photoelectrons. More intensity just gives you more of those photoelectrons with the same energy. Nice. So that's the graph. If you plot energy versus frequency, kinetic energy versus frequency, the slope will be the Planck constant. The x-intersection will give you the cutoff frequencies for different materials, sodium, gold in that case. All right. So there you are. There you have it. That's why, or that's how Einstein won his Nobel Prize. He should have won 3. He won 1. The reason he didn't win 3 is because relativity, I don't want to say, well, it was fully proven afterwards, but it keeps, as you know, relativity is one of those theories that we keep testing in nature, right? Whenever we see a supernova, whenever we see a black hole, right? We test the theory of relativity, right? Photons travel at the speed of light. They don't have any mass. So how come they have momentum? Well, it comes from the whole equation of some relativistic equations. One of them is in my t-shirt, right? The energy equation by Einstein, which, by the way, we can also use for subatomic particles. Whenever there's a nuclear reaction in the sun, a thermonuclear reaction in the sun, there's some energy being released. That energy, Einstein realized, is quantified as c squared. Now you need some mass. What about photons? Right? So that can be applied for a photon, but how about the energy and momentum for a photon? We know that the energy of a photon is hc over lambda, or h is just f, frequency, right? So from relativity, we know that the energy, the total energy, is equal to the rest energy, mc squared, plus gamma minus 1, mc squared. What's gamma? Gamma is this, 1 over the square root of 1 minus v squared over c squared. This is the Lorentz factor, by the way. It's a correction factor that we use for relativistic speeds. At relativistic speeds, when v approaches the speed of light, we have to apply this correction, and you probably have heard about it, because in relativity, we say that the mass becomes infinity at the speed of light. Yeah, here it is. That's the total energy, the total relativistic energy, okay? In terms of momentum, guys, momentum, we defined it already. Momentum is the amount of energy divided by the speed of light. Now, I want to go a bit further, but de Broglie discovered that any given mass has an associated wavelength, the de Broglie wavelength, h over momentum. So even for a photon, we can use this, h divided by lambda. This equation is a very simple equation for linear momentum. All right? And why is that important? Because Einstein's photoelectric effect allow us to understand particles, in this case, electrons absorbing or emitting photons as energy emitted or released. There is another experiment that studied the interaction of radiation with electrons as a collision. How is it possible that a massless photon collides with a mass, with an electron with mass? Because of this. Electrons, photons, have energy and momentum, right? That is the that is a Compton scattering. So what is a Compton scattering? And the inverse Compton scattering, there are two. Is the idea that high radiation, high energy radiation like X-rays, when they bump into an electron at rest, the radiation will be scattered at a lower frequency and a higher wavelength, and the electron will gain energy and momentum and will be scattered on the other direction. So we can find the angle theta, or we can find a relationship between the wavelength of the incident and the scattered photon and the angle here. The proof is very nice. It's actually conservation of energy and momentum. However, you need a few vectors here, and you need to know, I mean, I already showed you the equation for total energy. there is another equation that looks like this, by the way. Well, I'll show you later, but it's a longer equation for the energy. But when you apply conservation of momentum, and we know already the momentum of the photon, h over lambda prime here, and the conservation of energy, we get the following equation. That the difference between the wavelengths of the scatter and the incident photon is equal to the Planck constant h over the mass of the electron and the speed of light, all times 1 minus cosine of the angle theta. This is the angle between the scatter and the horizontal. Guys, I'm not gonna ask you a question about quantum scattering, but the idea here is to show you another experiment where we can finally prove that radiation, light, electromagnetic waves are also a stream of particles. So basically enclosing the whole idea of the dual behavior of light. All right? So the immediate consequence of everything was the idea proposed by de Broglie in 1923, right? If you guys watched last year the movie Oppenheimer, several of these scientists were mentioned, right? I remember they mentioned Planck at some point, Heisenberg for sure, who stayed in Germany, and then of course Oppenheimer, who came here to the US, and thanks to all these theories, and ultimately, thanks to Albert Einstein equations, he was able to uncover the math and physics of the atom bomb, right? So there's the de Broglie wavelength, the associated wavelength of matter, and then a few applications that we have seen for the dual behavior of light. For example, X-ray diffraction, right? We can apply some of these in previous concepts. For example, here, right? Remember, we spoke about this yesterday. D sine theta is the path difference of the incident and reflected beams in this case. And we can apply that, for example, when we go and we have X-rays going through a crystal, and we can see a photographic film on the screen. This is basically just the idea of diffraction. You already know this happens because light acts like a particle and like a wave, right? Now, you remember this. We talked about this yesterday, right? The John Double-Slit experiment. So we have light going through two slits, and we see the interference pattern there. Many of you probably have read about this experiment being replicated with particles. What particles? For example, electrons. You see, there is a nice way to prove that de Broglie was actually right. You can find the associated wavelength of an electron by using de Broglie's equation. So that means that an electron going at certain speed will have a wavelength. This wavelength can then be used to study and quantify the interference parameter or diffraction pattern built on a screen. This is even true if we have a particle beam so weak that only one particle is present at a time. So this is the idea. I don't know if you guys watch documentaries about modern physics, but the thing is that we have discovered that if you have a stream of electrons, you also see an interference pattern. And this happens even as weak as you can make the stream of electrons. What does that mean? It means that if you have the two slits, like this, and you have an electron incoming, right? Somehow, it's more, I always say that because it's a wave, but it still baffles scientists. What's going on here? Somehow it looks like the electron is divided into two. And you eventually on the screen here, you see bands. You see that? So we can replicate the interference, the double slit experiment of June, with electrons as weak as just having one that seem to be, well, what I do this here, seem to be divided into two. Now, what baffles scientists is that if there is no detector, if I don't place any detector, I will see the pattern on the right over there. As soon as you place a detector here, guess what? That disappears and you only see this. You only see that. Or if you place a detector on the other side. So it's like the electron knows, that is funny, right? But it's like the electron knows that this guy is there. The simple explanation for this is the same idea as interfering with an event. When you measure the temperature of a cup of coffee, you have to introduce a thermometer. By introducing a thermometer, you are reducing, maybe not by much, but you are reducing the temperature of the coffee. So the temperature you're going to measure was the one after you introduce a thermometer. Is there a way to measure the temperature of coffee without, maybe, but in any case, you are going to interfere with the cup of coffee and the coffee itself. The same may be this case. By interfering with the phenomena itself, by placing the detector, we may be interfering with the phenomena itself, right? Still a mystery, one of those mysteries of physics, right? And that's what I'm talking about, right? You can see the electron diffraction pattern here. You can see the bands. It's not as nice as with light, still, right? And this allows Heisenberg to realize what we know as the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. You see, yesterday I showed you guys an equation that relates the angle theta and the position of the first dark fringe. T sine theta equals to m lambda. So the position and the momentum, they both are needed for this. So we can find the width of the central maximum as lambda over W. Remember, m is equal to 1. So this was the equation that we did yesterday, right? Here. So in fact, let me show you very nicely. Let me just make sure that you guys are seeing this. So W sin theta for the first order, so the position of that position is lambda over W. Now, guys, that's position. Now we know from here that the de Broglie wavelength for an electron will be the h over the momentum of the electron. So I can use this, right? Sin theta equals to h over pw. So the position multiplied by the momentum of the electron is equal to h over w. So what does this is telling you? If you increase this, this has to decrease, and vice versa. If you increase this has to decrease. There's no other way around. They're inversely proportional, which then we write that the probability of knowing the position of the electron multiplied by the probability of the momentum is greater than or equal h over 2 pi. This is very important because it's telling you that the more you know about the momentum, aka the speed of an electron, the less you know its position. The only thing that we are certain about electrons is that they are in an electron cloud in certain allowed energy levels. The whole Bohr model and the whole solar system model that you guys were taught in high school is not valid. This is wrong. Because Bohr did use that to predict the radius and position of the electrons, right? But we know that's not possible thanks to this. So there you have it, okay? That's the whole idea of quantum physics. We covered all the main topics, all right? Now let's do some problems, right? We have time for that. I'm gonna do at least 2 problems, one photoelectric effect and one, in fact, let me show you where I wanna get them from. Last topics here. See if we can do this free. Yeah, let's do this free. All right. And then I'll answer questions. Some people are asking about tomorrow's exam. No, I already said it's not going to be in tomorrow's exam. All right. Okay, so.
Oh wait, sorry to ask, but the stuff that we're doing tomorrow's exam is just the stuff when it comes to like rays and mirrors and stuff, right?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, all right.
Well, don't forget about refraction
and all and the slips and stuff, right? The slids.
The slids. Yeah, the last question is about that. Yeah. It's only one question on that. Okay, so question 25. In the final exam, there will be 2 questions about this, guys. And that can be like the ones we're gonna do now. Very simple. Okay. So question 25, as you can see, is saying what frequency of electromagnetic radiation has photons at that energy? So they give you the energy of the photons, 4.7 times 10 to the negative 25 joules. So again, very tiny right? And they want you to find the frequency. All right. So for this, we need to use the equation E equals to H times nu. All right. So 4.7 times 10 to a negative 25 equals to 6.63 times 10 to a negative 34 times the frequency. So the frequency is this divided by that. Very well. Very easy, right? Very high as well, frequency. 10 to the 9, so 7.1 times 10 to the 8 hertz. All right. There you are. Let's see what the options they give you. Okay, so look at answers there, right? So these are very simple questions, but they don't give you this answer in there. They give you A, 710 megahertz. Yeah, that makes sense. Mega is 10 to the 6. 1, 2, 10 to the 8. So there it is, 710 megahertz. All right. Be careful. Let's do number 26. Now with a wave. Look, they give you all the variables, right? The H, C. So what is the photon energy of red light with that given wave? All right. So they give you the wavelength, 6.40 times 640 nanometers, right? So give it like that. And then, yeah, let's find the energy of this wavelength, right? There. So wavelength is 640 nanometers. The energy, when they give you the wavelength, is hc divided by lambda, which is then 6.63 times 10 to a negative 34 times the speed of light, 3 times 10 to the 8, all divided by, be careful with nanometers, 640 times 10 to a negative 9. All right. So let's say 6.63 times 3 divided by 640, 17, negative 17. So I get 3.11 times 10 to the negative 19 joules. Maybe they want you in electron volts. Let's see. Okay, no. They give you the energy in joules, yes. So sometimes they do that. They might ask you in electron volts. Remember, in electron volts, you will divide that by 1.6 times 10 to a negative 19. All right? In fact, there you are. Number 27. Photoelectric effect. Question 27 was in the final last semester, by the way. Or was it? Yes. Yeah, was it there? A beam of light with a frequency, with a range of frequency, given like that, is incident on a metal surface. If the work function of the metal surface is 2.20 electron volts, what is the maximum kinetic? Okay. So they want you to find the maximum kinetic energy of the photoelectrons. And they give you a few conversions in that. So guys, in a photoelectric effect problem, all right? So you are given that. Remember that the equation for photoelectric is that the maximum kinetic energy of the electrons is equal to the incident energy minus the work function. You are being asked this. You are not given this, but you're giving information for this, and that's in electron volts. Now let's see, this is what I will do if I were you, okay? Okay, they want the answer in electron volts. So let's put everything in electron volts. My work function is already in electron volts. It's 2.20. So I need my energy incident in electron volts. And what do I get? I get that the beam of light has a frequency range. Okay, you want the maximum kinetic energy of the photoelectrons. You want the maximum incident energy. The maximum energy is with the largest frequency. Right? So I have to use 6.10 times 10 to the 14. So I'm going to find the energy using H frequency, which is 6.63 times 10 to a negative 34, multiplied by 6.10 times 10 to the 14 hertz. This will give me the energy in joules, though. Well, let's see. 6.63 times 6.1, I get 40.4. Well, yeah, 4 times 10 to the negative 20 joules. In electron volts, what do? I have to divide. So then this will be divided by, right? That will be in electron volts. So let's see what I get. 25.3, 2.53. All right. That's the incident energy. See all the work? Very well. Then I go back here. And then the equation will be completed. 2.53 electron volts minus that. And that will give me the kinetic energy. That minus that is 0.33 electron volts. That's the answer, right? And if we take a look at the answer key, there it is, 0.33 electron volts. And then to finish, another one is asking, what is the cutoff frequency for a metal surface that has a work function of 5.42 electron volts? But look at the answers. The answers are in hertz. Hertz goes with joules. So how do we find out? Well, work function is energy. If you want to find the threshold frequency, right? FO is the work energy function divided by H. But that's hertz, joules, joules second. They're giving me the work function equals to show this again, guys. 5.42 electron volts. So this is 5.42 electron volts. How do I go from here to joules? I multiply. That's it. That's my energy in joules. $8.67 times 10 to a negative 19 joules. Yeah, it has to be very tiny in joules. Now I can find my frequency. Frequency? Yeah, they use that, right? A for mu will be 8.67 times 10 to the negative 19, all divided by the Planck constant. Let's see what we get. $1.31 times 10 to the 15. Hertz. You can write that in many ways. Let's see what they give in the answer key. Oh, no, there it is. 1.31 to 10 to the 15. All right, there it is. That's a few problems. You can find this guide, guys, in Canvas. If you go to files, not files, if you go to modules, in here. All right. And the extra credit assignment as well over there. So that is basically what I wanted to go over in this course, guys. Remember, Web Assignment 16 finishes in what we did yesterday. And then tomorrow's exam has 8 questions. All right. That should help you to prepare for the final. Although the final, as I say, is going to be easier than the exams that you guys have had during the summer. If you cannot make it tomorrow, you have to send me an email the latest today. I want to stay here after class answering any questions. That's basically it. I don't know if you guys have any questions about labs or lecture or what we did today. So I see a question here. It was in the chat. The last question on tomorrow's exam is what we did is about what we did yesterday. So it's 7 questions that are about lenses, mirrors, refraction, right? Nearsighted, farsighted, and then 1 question about yesterday's topic, right? And quantum physics will be in the final, not in tomorrow's exam. The final exam is all multiple choice. No, RLC you got in exam 2, so there's no RLC. All right. Also, just so you know, Kirchhoff rules, RLC, actually RLC may be in the final, but Kirchhoff rules for sure won't be on the final exam. Gauss's law won't be on the final exam. Everything else will be. Okay.
Oh
No
wait,
relativity.
wait, I'm sorry. So like from the beginning of what do we start like the final? So it starts from the beginning stuff, not Kirchhoff law and the and not the RLC, right?
No, RLC, there might be a question simple,
All right.
but no Gauss's law.
Okay.
That's for the final. That's for the final.
Mm-hmm. And you said it was like 20 it was like how many questions you said?
30 questions or multiple choice.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you.
Yes, the final exam is all multiple choice. Anybody else? Any questions? I'm stopping the recording now.
Professor, for the final exam,